The wild mare trembled as they dragged her toward the auction ring, her eyes wide with terror and defiance. This wasn't a place of second chances. This was the final stop for the forgotten, the last chance for horses that society had deemed worthless. The scent of fear hung in the stale air, mingling with dust and the stench of too many desperate animals, crowded into too small a space. Pickup trucks with rusted fenders lined the gravel parking lot, their owners inside looking for cheap labor or an even cheaper deal. The wooden benches groaned under the weight of weathered ranchers and slaughterhouse buyers, their faces expressionless as horse after horse was paraded before them, each one's fate decided by the casual raise of a hand. In the holding pen at the back, separated from the others, stood a wild mare. Her coat, once the color of burnished copper, now appeared dull under the fluorescent lights. Her muscles tensed beneath a frame that had clearly known both freedom and hardship. Unlike the domestic horses that hung their heads in defeated acceptance, she paced, her eyes darting wildly, nostrils flaring with each unfamiliar scent. The auction hands gave her pen a wide berth, one of them nursing a bruised arm from an earlier attempt to place a halter over her head. The auctioneer, a thin man with a voice worn raspy from decades of rapid-fire calling, checked his watch with growing impatience. The crowd was thinning as the day wore on. The good horses, the ones with breeding or training, had sold hours ago. Now only the bottom dollar animals remained. The old, the lame, the unmanageable. And this wild mare, her spirit still untamed, despite weeks in captivity, was perhaps the least desirable of all. When they finally dragged her into the ring, she fought every step, her hooves skidding on the sawdust floor, as if it were quicksand threatening to swallow her whole. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows that seemed to multiply her fears. The crowd shifted, uncomfortable witnesses to her panic. Some looked away, others sighed with impatience. A few made crude jokes about how much trouble she'd be worth. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell in practiced rhythm, starting with a price so low it was nearly insulting. Still no hands raised. In the far corner of the auction house, half hidden by a support beam, a woman watched. Unlike the others who saw only an unmanageable problem, her eyes never left the mare. And though no one in that dusty, forgotten place could have possibly known it, the fates of that wild mare and that watching woman were about to collide in a way that would leave no heart in the room untouched. The auctioneer raised his gavel, ready to declare another soul unsold and destined for the kill pens. When fate finally decided it had waited long enough to intervene, Emily Harrington pressed her hand against the small of her back, seeking relief from the dull ache that had become her constant companion. 8 months pregnant, she had no business being here, standing at the back of this dusty auction house in the middle of nowhere. The drive alone had been grueling. 3 hours of winding country roads that rattled her old truck and tested her already limited patience. Her doctor would have been furious knowing she'd made such a journey alone, especially now when her body demanded rest, when her baby could decide to arrive at any moment. But some pulls ran deeper than caution, stronger than common sense. Sweat beaded at her temples. Despite the barn's coolness, her fingers clutched the folded newspaper clipping in her pocket. The ink now smudged from the countless times she'd unfolded and reread it. The notice had been small, easily missed if she hadn't been scanning every auction listing within 100 miles for the past 3 months. Just 2 lines announcing the sale of wild horses recently rounded up from the Bitter Creek Range. Her heart had nearly stopped when she read those words. Bitter Creek, the place where she had spent the most transformative year of her life, tracking and documenting the wild herds before everything changed. The auction crowd hadn't noticed her yet. With her oversized flannel shirt and the way she lingered in the shadows, she remained invisible to the men who came here regularly, their eyes trained only for horseflesh worth bidding on. Emily preferred it that way. She didn't want questions, didn't need the sideways glances or whispered comments about a woman in her condition being in such a place. Nobody here would understand what had driven her to make this journey, how she had woken this morning with an urgency that defied explanation, a certainty that she needed to be at this particular auction on this particular day. Emily shifted her weight, wincing as the baby kicked forcefully against her ribs. She shouldn't have come. The chances were impossibly slim that she would find what she was looking for. The horses from Bitter Creek could be any of dozens of herds that roamed those remote mountains. Yet she couldn't shake the feeling, the pull that had drawn her here, defying logic and the protests of her tired body. It was the same feeling that had guided her through her work as a wildlife photographer, the instinct that had helped her track elusive herds across terrain most people would never traverse. The auctioneer's voice droned on, lot after lot. Emily's legs grew tired, her back screaming for relief. But still she waited, and then she saw it. A flash of copper in the holding pens. A distinctive white blaze on a mare being roughly handled toward the auction ring. Emily's breath caught in her throat, her hand instinctively moving to cradle her swollen belly, as if to steady both herself and her unborn child. Against all odds, against all reason, she had found what she had come for. Now she just had to find the strength to do what needed to be done, before it was too late for them all. Emily pushed herself away from the back wall, one hand supporting her swollen belly as she moved closer to the ring. Her heart raced, pounding against her ribs with an urgency that matched the wild mare's frantic movements. The mare's head lifted suddenly, nostrils flaring, her gaze cutting through the crowd until it found Emily. For one breathless moment, time seemed to stand still. Recognition flashed in those wild eyes, not of Emily herself, but of something deeper, something that transcended the boundaries between human and horse. The mare's ears pricked forward, her resistance momentarily forgotten, as she stared at the pregnant woman approaching the edge of the ring. The wild mare entered the auction ring with the reluctance of a condemned prisoner. Her copper coat was dulled by dust and fear, her muscles tensed beneath her skin as the harsh lights beat down from above. The auctioneer's voice rose and fell in practiced rhythm, but his words carried a note of resignation. Nobody wanted a wild thing. Nobody wanted the work. The crowd stared with blank expressions, auction paddles resting unused on their laps. These weren't the wealthy horse enthusiasts looking for projects or potential. These were practical men with practical needs, and a wild Mustang from Bitter Creek filled none of them. The auctioneer called for bids with increasing desperation. The kill buyers would take her for meat price, if no one else wanted her. Emily raised her hand, opening her mouth to call out a number, but the words never came. A wave of dizziness swept over her without warning, the barn suddenly tilting on its axis. The lights overhead blurred into streaking halos. Emily reached out blindly, finding nothing to steady herself as her knees gave way. The concrete floor rushed up to meet her as concerned murmurs rippled through the crowd. All too distant, all too late. What happened next defied explanation. The wild mare, who had fought against every human touch since her capture, suddenly lunged forward with such force that she broke through the flimsy gate holding her in the ring. Auction staff scattered, men shouted in alarm. But instead of bolting for freedom, the mare charged directly toward Emily's crumpled form. People scrambled to get out of her way, certain they were witnessing a tragedy about to unfold. But when the mare reached Emily, she did something that left everyone frozen in disbelief. She positioned her body between the fallen woman and the approaching crowd, her stance protective, her ears pinned back in warning to anyone who dared come closer. The mare lowered her head, her muzzle gently nudging against Emily's shoulder. Emily's eyes fluttered open, consciousness returning just in time to see the wild creature standing guard over her. Blood trickled from where the mare had cut herself breaking through the gate, yet she remained steadfast, ignoring her own pain. Their eyes met, and in that moment, everyone in that dusty auction barn witnessed something that transcended the ordinary world. A connection formed across impossible boundaries, a recognition that spoke of shared pasts and intertwined destiny. The auction house fell into stunned silence. The only sound, the soft, rhythmic breathing of a wild horse standing watch over a woman whose secret she somehow already knew. Medical staff hovered around Emily as color slowly returned to her pale face. The wild mare remained steadfast beside her, allowing no one to approach without Emily's nod of permission. The auction manager paced nervously, his schedule in ruins, his authority undermined by the inexplicable bond between woman and horse that had transformed his mundane sale into something bordering on miraculous. As Emily sipped water from a plastic cup, her hands still trembling, her story began to spill out, a tale that unwound like a thread connecting past to present, explaining the impossible scene they had all witnessed. 5 years earlier, Emily had abandoned her comfortable life as a wildlife photographer in the city, drawn to the remote wilderness of Bitter Creek by rumors of one of the last truly wild Mustang herds in the country. Armed with cameras and a stubborn determination, she had ventured into terrain few bothered to explore. For months she had tracked the herd, earning their cautious acceptance through patience and distance. Her photographs had captured something raw and vanishing from the American landscape, the untamed spirit of horses who had never known a human touch. The lead mare of the herd had been distinctive, a copper bay with a white blaze running like lightning down her face. Emily had named her Artemis, after the goddess of the wild. Through her camera lens, Emily had documented Artemis's pregnancy, her protective nature with the herd, and finally the birth of her foal on a spring night, beneath a canopy of stars. That foal had emerged into the world with the same distinctive blaze as her mother, a perfect white arrow pointing down her face. Emily had named her Esperanza, hope, for what she represented to the dwindling wild herds. Emily had spent weeks documenting the foal's first steps, her playful nature, the unique bond she shared with her mother. Those photographs had later become the centerpiece of Emily's campaign against the Bureau of Land Management's planned roundups in the area. She had fought with everything she had: petitions, articles, public appeals. But in the end, budget constraints and drought conditions had won out. The roundups had proceeded, the herds scattered to holding facilities across the state. Emily had never discovered what happened to Artemis or her foal. The heartbreak had been too much. She had abandoned her advocacy work, returned to commercial photography, and tried to forget. Now, impossibly, that same foal stood before her, grown into a mare herself, but bearing the unmistakable blaze that Emily had photographed thousands of times. Esperanza, the wild foal who had never known human contact, had somehow recognized the scent, the shape, the very essence of the woman who had watched over her earliest days from a respectful distance. More than that, she had sensed the new life growing within Emily's womb, igniting some primal protective instinct that transcended her fear of humans. As Emily finished her story, her hand rested on her belly, where her child moved restlessly within. The mare, Esperanza, lowered her head to that same spot, her breath warm through Emily's shirt. The connection between them ran deeper than memory, deeper than logic. It was ancient, primordial, the recognition between two mothers, one current, one future, bound by something no auction house could ever properly value or understand. The veterinarian approached cautiously, medical bag in hand, gaze shifting between Emily and the wild mare that refused to leave her side. The auction had come to a complete standstill, all pretense of business abandoned, as everyone watched the unfolding miracle. Emily sat on a folding chair now, her breathing steadier, her face regaining its color. But her eyes never left Esperanza. The mare stood sentinel beside her, ears swiveling at every sound, body positioned between Emily and the crowd, as if she had appointed herself guardian of both mother and unborn child. The vet knelt slowly near Emily, careful to telegraph his movements. Esperanza's muscles tensed, her nostrils flaring, but Emily placed a gentle hand on the mare's neck. The touch seemed to flow like electricity between them, a current of trust that defied the mare's years of avoiding human contact. Esperanza remained vigilant, but allowed the man to check Emily's vitals, her eyes tracking his every move with intelligent awareness. When he placed the stethoscope against Emily's rounded belly, something extraordinary happened. Esperanza lowered her head, pressing her muzzle against the exact spot where the stethoscope had been. Her ears pricked forward, as if listening to the tiny heartbeat within. The crowd watched in stunned silence as the wild mare, who had allowed no human to touch her since her capture, now stood in perfect stillness, her breathing synchronized with Emily's, her entire focus on the life growing inside this woman. When Emily shifted uncomfortably, Esperanza adjusted her position, offering her body as support. When someone moved too quickly nearby, the mare's posture changed instantly, protective without being aggressive, a clear message that this woman was under her care. A local rancher's wife brought Emily a blanket. Approaching with the careful respect one might offer to royalty, Esperanza accepted this offering with a dignified nod. Watching as the woman draped it around Emily's shoulders, the mare then did something that left even the most hardened cowboys misty-eyed. She carefully grasped the edge of the blanket with her teeth when it slipped, adjusting it back over Emily's shoulder with the delicate precision of a mother tending to her foal. Hours passed. The auction manager attempted several times to resume the sale, but the crowd refused to disperse, transfixed by the bond forming before their eyes. Emily explained how pregnant mares in wild herds were protected by the entire family group, how they instinctively understood vulnerability and strength. Esperanza was treating Emily as one of her own, recognizing her condition in a way that transcended species barriers. When Emily finally felt strong enough to stand, Esperanza moved with her, step for step, adjusting her pace to Emily's slower one. The mare that had fought handlers with such ferocity now walked beside Emily with the gentle restraint of a longtime companion, never pulling ahead, never stepping too close. Their shadows merged on the auction house floor, the silhouette of woman and horse moving as one being. The veterinarian, watching them walk the length of the auction barn together, shook his head in wonder. In all his years working with horses, he had never seen anything like it. A wild, untamed creature, forming an instantaneous bond with a human based on nothing more than a shared past. Neither could fully explain, and a protective instinct that defied logical explanation. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the auction yard. Hours had passed since Emily's collapse, since Esperanza had broken through barriers both physical and metaphorical to reach her. The auction manager paced the worn floorboards, glancing repeatedly at his watch, his clipboard, his dwindling audience. Time meant money in his business, and this unexpected disruption had cost him plenty of both. His patience had worn as thin as the soles of his boots. Emily sensed the shifting mood, the growing restlessness of those who had witnessed the miracle but now needed the practical matter of the auction resolved. Esperanza remained steadfast beside her, no longer agitated but alert, her ears swiveling toward every sound, her body still positioned protectively near Emily's swollen belly. The mare, who had been deemed wild, dangerous, and worthless, now stood as the embodiment of instinctive compassion. The auction manager approached, his expression a careful mask of professional detachment. The auction needed to continue, he explained. Decisions needed to be made. The mare still required processing, either sold or transported to the holding facility for unwanted horses. His words, though delivered without malice, carried the heavy finality of a system that processed animals as commodities, not beings. Emily's heart contracted painfully in her chest. With effort that made her dizzy, Emily pushed herself to her feet. Esperanza shifted immediately to provide support, her solid presence steadying Emily as she faced the manager. Emily's voice was quiet but carried through the hushed auction barn. As she described her intention to purchase Esperanza, the mare had been considered unsellable an hour ago. Surely now the price would be minimal, but the manager's expression hardened. The unprecedented events had drawn attention. Other parties were now expressing interest in the suddenly famous wild mare. A kill buyer, at the back of the room, raised his hand, naming a price that made Emily's blood run cold. A social media video of the mayor's dramatic intervention had already circulated online. The mayor now had value. As a curiosity, as a story, as something to exploit. Emily's savings wouldn't stretch to match the climbing bids. Her voice faltered as she named her maximum offer, knowing it wasn't enough, feeling Esperanza's warmth against her side, as if the mayor understood exactly what hung in the balance. An unexpected voice cut through the tension. A weathered rancher stood up from his seat, his calloused hand raised. He offered not a bid, but a statement. This mayor and this woman belonged together, and separating them would be a crime against something sacred that they all had witnessed today. Another voice joined, then another. These hard men who dealt in livestock daily recognized something transcendent in the bond between Emily and Esperanza, something that overrode the cold calculations of commerce. The auction manager found himself facing not just a pregnant woman pleading for a horse, but his entire community united behind an impossible connection they couldn't explain, but refused to sever. The room fell silent as he weighed profit against principle, procedure against the profound. Esperanza's intelligent eyes followed him, not with wild fear now, but with dignified expectation. The mayor had made her choice hours ago. Now, as the manager raised his gavel, the fate of both horse and woman hung in the balance, suspended on the edge of a single decisive moment. The gavel struck with finality, its sound echoing through the auction barn like thunder. The manager's decision rang out clear and unmistakable. Esperanza would go home with Emily, not because of the highest bid, but because some bonds transcended the rules of commerce. The price was nominal, a figure so small it seemed almost symbolic, acknowledging that what had happened in that auction house couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. As Emily signed the paperwork with trembling hands, hardened ranchers and cowboys removed their hats in silent respect, many wiping moisture from eyes unused to tears. 2 weeks later, as dawn broke over Emily's small ranch, Esperanza stood alert at the pasture fence. Her coat now gleamed with health, the copper highlights catching the morning sun. Her ears pricked forward at the sound of the front door opening, her soft, nickering greeting carrying on the cool morning air. Emily emerged, moving slowly, one hand supporting her now massive belly. Each morning followed the same ritual. Emily would bring apples or carrots, Esperanza would gently take the offerings, and then the mayor would walk beside Emily as she made her careful way around the property, never rushing, always attentive. The changes in the mayor astounded those who came to visit. The wild, untamable creature from the auction now approached the fence. When Emily called, allowed herself to be brushed, and even accepted a soft halter when needed, yet she remained selective with others, tolerating their presence, but reserving her gentlest interactions for Emily alone. The local vet, after examining Esperanza thoroughly, declared it wasn't that the mare had been tamed. She had simply chosen her person. When Emily's water broke 3 days later, it was Esperanza who alerted the neighbor with frantic whinnying that carried across property lines. The mare paced the fence line until help arrived, her agitation only settling when Emily was safely transported to the hospital. Throughout the night, Esperanza refused food and water, standing vigilant at the fence facing the direction Emily had departed. Dawn was breaking when Emily returned home, exhausted but radiant, a tiny bundle cradled in her arms. Esperanza's reaction left everyone present in tears. The mare approached the fence with reverent slowness, her nostrils flaring gently as she took in the scent of the newborn. Emily carefully lifted the blanket to reveal her daughter's face. Esperanza lowered her head, her breath a soft whisper against the infant's cheek, her eyes showing a depth of understanding that defied human comprehension. They named the baby Hope, after the Spanish name Emily had given Esperanza years ago when she was just a foal running wild in Bitter Creek. As the seasons passed, the sight of Mara and child together became a symbol of something profound in their small community. The wild and the innocent, both protected by a mother's love, both finding safety in belonging to each other. If you've been moved by this incredible true story of connection across boundaries, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more tales that prove the extraordinary bonds between humans and animals. These moments remind us that compassion and understanding can emerge in the most unexpected places. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.